Okay, welcome everyone. I'm so happy you're here. I'm totally excited, although I have done lots of public speeches, but this is somehow different. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to the next 45 minutes, 40 minutes, something like that. Um, Let me briefly introduce myself. I'm Judith, and normally you would say something like, I'm a teacher or I'm a painter. But to me, I always had problems to say I'm this and that because in my past, I've worn so many hats that I cannot define myself through my occupations. So, but there is a red thread throughout. And the red thread is no matter whether I curated art shows or I teach yoga or I produce cosmetics, there was always a red thread, and this was women. And only a couple of, years ago, I remembered that I already started when I was already like only very young, like 8 or 9 years old. I founded together with my sister and neighbor girls. I founded the club of nitresses and Amazons, and we made swords and we were fighting, and and was really a very powerful girls' club. So the empowerment of women is my core desire and my passion, and I truly believe that's what my soul signed up for and what I'm here for. I am 51, so interestingly, statistically, the average age women come into menopause. And I'm married and have two teenage girls. And when I was, like writing this in my notes, I was thinking, does ever or did ever a guy introduce himself saying, I have two or three kids? Yeah, it just crossed my mind. I think I never heard a guy introducing himself and telling how many kids he has. So today I will talk about midlife in general and the transformation it entails. And what is very important for me is that it is not only about midlife, it is you can translate it to almost every season a woman goes through. So it is most important, I would say, for women starting with the age of 30, and you go through different cycles, through different seasons, and then so we talk about midlife, but if you are not in midlife yet or past it already, this also can be translated into other seasons. So just that you know. Um, and I would love to introduce today a new paradigm, a paradigm shift, or rather, I suggest a new reframe. So that my hope is that you leave today with a new sense of excitement for what is to come and for what is possible. So let me share my screen. Okay. So hold on. Women currently are under an im, immeasurable amount of pressure. Women have been, like told what to do, what to wear, how we should behave, and how we need to look. And this is amplified through social media nowadays. And there is so much, like outside stress on women that is within the larger group of our society where there's a stress overload anyway. So there's so much stress, that, and then there is the information overload. Plus, we are the generation that has the most toxin load in history. And then there are these enormous expectations, especially on women. But the thing is, with women, that no matter how we are or how we feel, we learn to force us through, to ignore pain, to suffer through, to override, to perform, to keep going, to play it small, and to, like to just, ignore the pain and keep on doing. And this is really interesting because that way a lot of symptoms are ignored. And only a couple of years ago, when I started to deal with menopause or perimenopause, I noticed that already 11 years ago, so in the beginning of my 40s, I started to have symptoms. And I didn't, I ignored them. I overrode them and I didn't took them seriously. I had hair loss, for example, and I went from doctor to doctor, from naturopath to naturopath, and nobody ever said anything to hormones. They gave me something for my stomach. They gave me vitamins and whatnot, and it didn't really, it changed at some point, but nobody ever thought it was a reaction to perimenopause. And then I had a change in my cycle also already like 10 years ago. And I didn't know what it was. So, and I didn't care because I didn't have any pain or anything like this. And then I experienced what a lot of friends of mine, women, experience. I had a loss in desire, and I had started to have major problems with my pelvic floor. And I this is always attributed to birth. And this is really interesting because we believe, okay, we gave birth. And I always said, we are just material, we are giving birth and then nature get rid of us, we are not, we don't matter anymore. That was what I thought. And so and now I know that these are very typical symptoms of midlife. And we are in the middle of our career in this time. So we have are in the heights of our career. Then we have children, and typically in midlife, we have teenage children, which also are a problem in itself. And then our parents start aging, and so aging in the way that we have to take care of them. So this adds up. This is really compounding stress. And so we're under constant demands. And then the body begins to speak. Then our body also becomes a problem. So we react with either overriding, ignoring, with anger, fear, shame, distress, reaction, and frustration. It's really like, oh my God, now you are starting to betray me. But I would like to ask these questions differently. What if the symptoms you're experiencing are nothing to fight, but something more rather to understand, because maybe they mean something. The story we have been taught by society in general is that midlife means decline. So menopause, everything. If you think of menopause, of course, the discourse changed a little bit. Is like you think of aging, of decay, of becoming a senior, of retirement, pension. It's very unattractive. And but there is something that is not spoken out loud, really. That women, that we have been carrying an invisible load for decades. And this is because our hero hormone, so-called estrogen, makes us super resilient. So in our cycling years, estrogen is our major hormone, and our body is full of estrogen receptors. Estrogen makes us super resilient towards stress. It is metabolically super important. It has an effect on muscle building, on bone density, and we become basically superhumans. It is studied that if your estrogen goes down in perimenopause, that trauma hits much, much, much harder than in your cycling years where you are strong in your estrogen levels. But this fact that we are superhumans, that we have so much workload because we can, this is taken advantage by the society, big time. This is 10.8 trillion. So this is 10.8 plus 11 zeros dollars per year, which is the unpaid work of women contributing to the global economy per year. 10.8 trillion. That's what we contribute in a year. And this is conservatively counted and with at minimum wage. And this is 3 times and everything what the tech industry makes a year. So 10.8 trillion. That's ginormous. So now think of what happens if we change. So the results that are the effects that are attributed to perimenopausal symptoms in the US alone are $1.8 billion per year due to productivity loss because of symptoms. And if you count in absence, medical care, and fluctuations, the effect rises to over $26 billion. So this is the loss that is attributed to perimenopausal symptoms. And that is why, by all means, we are meant to come back to normal, to where we have been before. So when our body changes, we are told to fix it. Why? Because society is depending on us, so we can get back holding everything. This is with HRT, medications, discipline, whatnot, the whole thing. This is not per se wrong, but I'm just questioning here the motivation. So let's start thinking it differently. Maybe that's not the truth. So maybe the body is not failing. Maybe this change wants us to be seen differently. So let's ask the question differently. Not as in terms of bad or less, or is it maybe as aging is not entirely negative. What if this change is not accidental, but intelligent? You all know nature. Nature is so fascinating because it is infinitely intelligent. So I asked myself, why on earth would this transition, these changes, be without purpose? But we had learned to listen to others instead of trusting our own feelings. Because we tend to trust everyone but ourselves. We trust more the doctors than ourselves. We trust the influencers, the media. Whereas in nature, it's super interesting because in nature, elder females are often not diminished, they become essential. The only animal in nature are whales, which also go through menopause. And these whales, when they are post-productive, the females start leading the pod. And this is super interesting because we found out that if the older females lead the pod, then the offspring is 15% bigger. So we humans, we spend on average 42% of our life in post-production. 42%. So why? If this is just decay and, like negative. Maybe you've heard of the grandmother hypothesis. So the grandmother hypothesis divides a tribe in the cave age into three parts. So there are the men who go out hunting for a big kill, for a mammoth. And they're gone for days, and it is not guaranteed that they come back with a kill. And when they do, they didn't have refrigerators or freezers, so they had to either dry things or eat them all at once. So then there was a second group. These were the mothers, the ones who were giving birth, the pregnant women and the breastfeeding women, and the ones who took care of toddlers and small children. And then there was the third group. This was the grandmothers. These were the grandmothers. So when the women were away, these grandmothers took care of the whole tribe. They went out looking for tubers, for roots, for mushrooms, for berries, and for hunting for rabbits, small animals. So they guaranteed the survival of the whole tribe. And also, of course, like with the whales, they had this wisdom, the life wisdom. They knew where to find the best roots. They know where to find the right mushrooms. So the tribe totally depended on the grandmother. So it was not an evolutionary mistake, but a survival strategy. So what if menopause is not an ending, but rather a transitioning into a different role, into a new role? We could start with asking about the symptoms. So nowadays, symptoms are viewed as a dysfunction, as pathological, as more like a disease. So maybe this is rather a sign of a reorganization and not something wrong. So there is a brain fog, for example. This is a very typical menopausal symptoms. I suffer from it myself. And this can be kind of scary because you lose words, you start forgetting things, and you think of, okay, am I developing dementia now? But it is really interesting to know that a woman's brain changes 3 times during her life. So a woman's brain is the best example for neuroplasticity. So the first time a woman's brain changes is during during puberty. You can tell. And the second time is postpartum. The brain changes a second time to recognize facial expressions better, to, to totally be focused on your little one. And then the third change happens in perimenopause. And this is super interesting. The corpus callosum, which is the highway connection between both hemispheres, this one is shrinking. Before menopause, so in the cycling years, there was a very active interaction between both hemispheres. So in our cycling years, when estrogen and progesterone were high, both halves worked together. There was a bilateral brain. And then it changes so that both sides become more individual. And this is super interesting because when it was bilateral before, it's now concentrated. For example, when you were looking at speech, processing, it's concentrated on the left hemisphere. So our brain changes from being very holistic to more effective, because now the information goes to the hemisphere where it is most efficiently processed. And this is interesting to know when you are experiences these kind of changes. You can be sure that after this transition, after the reorganization, you are back to full function. So we change in this time from an empathy network to a focus mode. And I can really tell you it's so true. I've been the best example for multitasking before. I was writing emails and okay, I'm guilting then all at the same time talking to my kids, writing something else. So I did a lot of things at the same time. It was not a problem at all. But now, and I can remember when I was a kid, I had friends when they read a book, I started talking to them and they did not hear me. They were so focused on their book, and I could never understand how could they be focused on their book and they don't hear me. But that's now the same with me. When I'm writing an email, someone is talking to me. I hear that someone is talking to me, but I don't hear what they're saying. It has changed completely. So I'm so much more focused, but at the same time, I lose my multitasking facilities. So then there is the second most feared change in perimenopause, which is the weight gain. And the weight gain especially happens around the belly. So you're tending to get more pouchy belly. And the visceral fat, that's the one what that is, like getting bigger. But it's so interesting because when your hormones go down, the body starts to adapt. And normally, when the ovaries start, end with hormone production, the adrenal glands and the fat takes over because they produce hormones as well. And in our stress society, the adrenal glands tend to be super fatigued. So it's the fat. And so the body does this for a reason. So last but not least, the hot flashes, the example of menopause. And I read something so interesting. During your cycling years, your whole energy, your whole focus of attention is centered in your womb. So you are going through menstruation, which is super energy requiring. And then you go through the different phase in the cycle, then the ovulation, everything. And there's so much energy that is needed in your womb. And then suddenly, this is not necessary anymore. And I read that it can be viewed as the Kundalini, the energy that is rising up suddenly. So the hot flashes are not just some vasomotor or, temperature problems, but it is rather the energy that is rising up to the brain. So interestingly, when we have more knowledge around what is happening in our body, and this is very generally speaking, without fear, but more clarity, this comforts our amygdala. And the amygdala is responsible for fear detection. And if you know what is going on in your body can feel much safer. And when the body feels safer, it happens so that your symptoms lessen. They often soften. So what we think, believe is changing our biology. And very interestingly, indigenous people, so there are a lot of indigenous tribes who don't know anything about perimenopausal symptoms. Because first of all, of course, they live in a less stressful, way than we do, but they also don't have the whole narrative around perimenopause as being negative. So, what if this season, this change is not a decline, but an initiation into wisdom, leadership, and a new kind of power? I love this sentence. Symptoms are information, not identity. I think we can all print this on a shirt, and we all know of people who have some kind of disease or a diagnosis, and they completely took it over as their identity. So, what if we start questioning instead of how do I stop this symptom, rather asking, what is this asking of me? Why do I have this? And this is not only relating to menopausal symptoms. This can be seen very generally. So maybe your body is asking for honesty, for truth. Where are you bullshitting yourself? Where don't you speak your truth? And I have a theory around Hashimoto. I know a lot of women who suffer from Hashimoto. Hashimoto is a thyroid disease, well, autoimmune disease where the thyroid shrinks dramatically. And this is a mostly women-only disease. And my theory is that is because a lot of women don't dare to speak their truth because the thyroid is sitting here in the throat, and the throat is the where the root the throat chakra is. So this is all about speech and truth and your own voice. So maybe your body is also asking for change. So change in habits, change in diet, change in movement, change in your sleep pattern, your stress management, and most importantly nowadays, your detoxing physically or detoxing mentally. I always say that, like the symptoms, it's so interesting that a very, like super good example is bladder infection. I once had an affair with someone and I was not super fond of him. But I talked myself into it because I said, okay, okay, you don't love him, but never mind, relax, just, go with the flow, have the affair, have fun. But I started to get a bladder infection and I cured it with antibiotics. It came back. And it came back and it came back. So I developed a chronic bladder infection. So I ignored my signals. And then the bladder infection developed into a kidney infection. And this is so painful for if you had this, you know this. And then I came to this guy and I told him, I'm sorry, I have to end this. And the next day, my symptoms were gone. I was cured, and I never to this day had a bladder infection again. Maybe your body is also asking for more feminine energy. That means, for example, cycle syncing. If you ever heard about this, there are a lot of women who greatly profit from syncing their cycle to their timetable, to their schedule. So that you have more stressful appointments in the first 2 weeks of your cycle than when you are very in the public eye and during ovulation, and then the more restful phase in the last 2 weeks of your cycle. I personally never, it didn't work for me because I'm not so much, inhibited by my cycle, but it works for a lot of women I know. And maybe also your body is asking for more support, not only supporting your body, but also from support from someone else. So ask for help. It's not a problem. We don't need to do everything ourselves. So the body often starts to speak. I love this sentence as well, where the self has been silenced. And you maybe know this already, all physical dis-ease that's what a disease is, begins as energetic misalignment. So the body starts speaking, getting louder, often before it whispers to you on an energetic level. So every time you have something, symptoms developed, and you go to the root, you knew it. You knew it before, but often we don't want to hear it. So I encourage everyone, start listening to your body. What do I feel? What are you trying to tell me? Where is the pain located? Where am I out of alignment? What represents this body part for me? There's a very famous book by Louise Hay. It's called Heal Your Body. I can highly recommend it. She lists alphabetically all kinds of aches and pains and diseases to certain body parts and the reason. What truth have you not expressed? What emotions have you not allowed yourself to feel? What part of you is asking to be seen? And when did the pain or the symptom occur? I always say, start Sherlock Holming your symptoms. And just imagine, if your body were your best friend, how would you care for it differently? So a very great way for you is to start expressing yourself. Then, because everything that is unspoken in your life gets spoken out through the body. So start speaking out. Use your voice. Express your truth. Start a podcast. Start writing. Write a newsletter. Start a book club. A women's circle. Tell your story. Cooperate. Collaborate. Change your routine. Move in nature. And work on your purpose. And this all pushes oxytocin, which is the feel-good love hormone, and GABA, which is also another neurotransmitter that is very important. And what I like best is to rebel. That's very good for your hormone levels. So you don't have to stay in confusion about what your body and life are asking of you. The way you can, if you respect all this, you can transform from self-abandonment to self-trust, to reverence, from fear to trust, from shame to listening and deeper embodiment. Because we all want more energy. We want to be healthier. We want to have less or no symptoms. And we want to be proud of what we are capable of. And we want to have more self-esteem. So if this all resonated today, I would love to introduce and invite you to The Root, which is the program that I have developed. And The Root is the foundational program within the wider journey of the rising. So I created the rising as an ascension path. And there are different programs that are compounded, they're stacked on each other. And the root is the basic program because we need to develop our vessel before we can start to rise. Only if we're in a body that is a healthy, strong, and energetic container, then only we can rise. So we need the body to be strong in order to be, to become the best of ourselves. So this is a 6-week group experience for women in a season of deep inner change, and for all the women who feel that there is something shifting in them. Not only in your body, but also in your emotions, in your identity, your energy. And by the way, did you know that most of the suicides with women occur between 45 and 55? And that most 70% of all divorces are initiated by women over 40. So this is a phase of major transformation, not only bodily, but also mentally. So, and if you want more than surface level advice and more than symptom management, you want a space that helps you make sense of what's happening, then you are right here with the root. Inside the root, you will be guided to a deeper trust with your body, and awake, grounded clarity and energetic aliveness, and access the deeper power that's available to you. We begin June 4, and this is going on for 6 weeks. Your investment is 888 euros, and we have payment options available. So if this is speaking to you, this is your invitation, and I would love to see you inside the root. So all details will come in the follow-up email as well as the replay. And if you have any further questions, you're welcome to ask them. Otherwise, I thank you so much for being here and hope to see you inside the root. If you don't have any questions, I say goodbye and see you later. Bye.